right, guys, ladies, welcome back. Last time we were together, we worked on labeling a color wheel with the appropriate colors. Our color wheel looked something like this. It had the primary colors in the center. It had the secondary colors around that. And the primary colors showed what happened when you mix those two, and those two. And then from there, it went even further, and it showed what happens when you mixed a primary and a secondary color together. You made an intermediate. Well, today, we are actually going to paint intermediate colors. So we learned how to apply that knowledge in a real-life situation here. Now, this is just a practice sheet. So, if you get out of the lines a little bit or it runs into something else, it's not the end of the world, okay? This is practice, okay? We're just going to practice making these colors on this sheet. It's kind of like a worksheet before you take the test, okay? It's just the practice part. If we make mistakes, it's okay. We're going to make them on here. It's no big deal. So, the first thing I'm going to do is talk about watercolor paints themselves. Because those of you who are painting at home with me, your paint set probably looks something more like this. It doesn't look like the paints that we use in class because those I order from, an art supply company, and they're made to last a little longer than these watercolor sets are. So for our purposes, we use the other types of paints when we are in art class. But these are great for using for when you're at home. Now the difference is the ones we use in class are like a really hard cake of sorts. They're like a block of paint. These are kind of soft from the get-go. So when you add water to these, you don't want to rub really hard on the surface of a watercolor set or the watercolor paints because you don't want those colors to get really mushy and squish out and run out too quickly. So it doesn't take as much water to use watercolors as it does the paint sets that we're used to using in the classroom. So I just wanted to stress that to you guys before we started painting this. And I'm going to dab a little water in here because I got some green in it earlier. So I'm going to clean that off, and I'm going to take my little Kleenex. I'm just going to dab that little bit of green out because I don't want that to affect my colors here in just a second. So to start, what you can do is you can take some clean water and just put a little drip of water onto each of your colors there. Whoops, that's not good. I'll be right back. I'm going to correct my mistake there, and I'll be right back. You know what? I was going to correct this off camera, and then I thought, you know what? No, that's a really good learning moment, just so you guys realize, the art teacher isn't perfect either, and I make mistakes too. So I'm going to correct it on camera. What the problem was my water can was dirty, and so I had to go get a clean can of water. But I'm just going to use my Kleenex, and I'm just going to soak that up, just like I did on pulling the green out of this a second ago. So there you go. I use Kleenex in the art room to do that instead of paper towels because we have the brown paper towels at school, and they're pretty rough, and they don't really soak up mistakes as well as the tissue does. So if you have like white paper towels or something like that at home, that would work just fine for what I just did. But like I said, in the classroom, that's what we use. And there's our trusty little water cans that everybody's so used to. So I'm just going to rinse that out. I'm going to put a little drop of water in each one of these little sets. And there's my purple or violet. And I'm not going to wet the brown or black because I'm not using them today. So I'm going to leave those dry for the moment. Okay, so most of you, if you are painting along with me at home, you have printed this off of our Google Classroom. It's kind of the same setup as the color wheel was. We had the primaries, then we had the secondaries, and then we mixed the intermediates. Well, the primary colors are down the left side in this column. The secondaries are down the right side in this column, and then our intermediate colors are in the middle, because what we want to do is we want to take one primary, one secondary, and mix them together to make the intermediate. Same thing all the way down. So to start out with, I am going to just paint the colors in these columns first, and then we'll focus on the colors in the center. So I'm not going to make you watch me paint all the primary and secondary colors, but I am going to show you how I use these paints, because it is different from the paints we use in the classroom. After I put those drops of water on each of my colors, all I have to do now is just kind of tap my brush on that color. I don't have to like go around in a circle like we do on the paints in class, because those paints can take a little more abuse than these paints can. So I'm just going to kind of tap it a little bit, and then I'm going to bring my brush up here, and I'm going to paint both squares at the same time, because they're both red, okay? I don't have to paint them separately. I mean, save myself some time, okay? So I'm just going to paint both of these at the same time. So there is my red. Now, if you printed this off, your paper is probably on printer paper. So your paper may wrinkle or ripple a little bit more than if we were painting this in the classroom, because the paper's thinner, okay? I don't recommend painting paintings on printer paper, because it's just too thin. It can't handle the weight of the paints. So same thing here, and I'm just going to do it. Notice how I start in the center. Excuse me. I start in the center because if my paint runs, it has space to run, okay? Hopefully it doesn't, but it might. Excuse me. Whew. So like I said, that way if it runs from the center outwards, and maybe the paper will slow it down by soaking it up before it runs out of those edges. So I am actually trying to be kind of careful and paint this in, but you know what, guys and ladies, if you make a mistake and it goes outside the lines, don't stress about it. It's a practice sheet, okay? It's not that big of a deal. Don't beat yourself up because you got outside the lines. It's okay. It's art class. Most of the time we don't believe in keeping it inside the lines. So I am going to continue to paint all of these in, and I will come back as soon as I get that finished. And you guys go ahead and do yours too, and then we'll meet back and we'll talk about these colors here in the center, our intermediate colors, okay? So I will be right back when I'm finished. I do want to say this. I just painted this orange square, and instead of washing my brush out and switching to my purple, I'm going to skip on down and I'm going to paint my second orange. That way, you know, it kind of saves me on some of my paint, and it also allows this orange space to dry a little bit before I put the purple right next to it, because, you know, or violet, excuse me. Orange and violet, when mixed together, will kind of turn a brownish color, and when we're trying to mix pure colors, you don't want to muddy them up either on accident or on purpose when we're trying to like figure out what plus what makes what. So I'm going to like give those a moment to dry you know, and then I'll do this one and that one, and then I'll do that one and that one. It kind of gives, you know, everything a minute to dry before I put something else right next to it. So I'll be back when I get those finished. All right, there we go. So I've got my spaces finished up. And if you look right here, you can see that purple is trying to wick over into the green. So if that happens to you like it's happening to me right now, remember when we took the tissue and we soaked up the color that had dirtied up our paints? Well, we can kind of do the same thing on our paper. You can kind of use that tissue kind of like a paint eraser of sorts, and it will soak up that little run right there. And I'm going to let that little spot dry for a minute. And when that purple dries, I can touch that back up and it'll be fine. But I just have to give that purple enough time to dry so it doesn't pull back into the green again, okay? So while we wait for that, we are going to get started on the intermediate colors. So just like when we talked about the color wheel, when we said, you know, a primary red mixes with a secondary orange, and in the middle you get that intermediate color, that color in between the other ones, and that's going to be red-orange. So if we look up here at the top, that first box, that's exactly what it says. It says red-orange. So I'm going to look at my colors, and I'm going to decide which one I think is lighter. And so I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to say, okay, is the red or orange lighter? Well, they're about the same, but if I had to pick one, I would say that the orange is a little lighter than the red. So I'm going to paint this space in the middle with some orange first, because it's always easier to make a color darker than it is to try to make a color lighter. So I'm always going to paint it with the light color first and then go from there. So I'm just going to put some color down so that it covers up those letters, and that should be enough for me to rinse my brush out. And I'm going to just barely tap it into the red, okay? Just one little tap, just like that. Can you see that little bit on there? I'm just going to take that and I'm just going to stir it into that orange. And then I'm going to kind of look at it and I'm going to say, okay, if I put a little part there, does it look like red? No. Do I go over here? Does it look like orange? Yes, it still looks too orangey for me. So I'm going to rinse my brush out because I was just mixing colors. And I'm going to tap and get one more red there. And I'm going to stir that in. And then I'm going to come over here and check it. That looks a little better. Doesn't look like red. Doesn't really look like orange. But I'm going to go one more tap. So I'm going to rinse my brush out because I was just mixing colors. And I'm going to get one more little bit. I'm just going to stir that in, and that should do it. Yeah, that's going to do it right there. So if I check, doesn't look like orange anymore. And if I come over here, it doesn't necessarily look like red either. So I'm going to spread that color out all the way across that space. That way it's up against the red and it's up against the orange. So when I look at it, I don't know about on your screen, but when I'm looking at mine in real life here, it doesn't necessarily look like red, but it definitely does not look like orange either. And actually on my computer screen, it's doing a pretty good job of it. So I know it's hard to tell because, you know, you're not here in person looking at me, but you could see that. If I had to, what I could do is I could come in here and I could paint a second coat over my primary colors, and that will really make that stand out more. So it really changes how that looks. Okay. Now you can tell. That looks better. So I'm just trying to make it look better on the screen for you guys. Okay. So again, like what I did over here, I need these spaces to dry a little bit between, colors. So I'm not going to do this one next. I'm actually going to skip down a couple, and I'm going to do this yellow orange next. So I've got my primary color that's yellow. I've got my secondary color that's orange. So when I bring the two in the middle, that intermediate color will be yellow-orange. So I have to decide which is the lighter color. Is it red, or not red, is it yellow or is it orange? Obviously, yellow is the lightest one on the color wheel. So I'm going to just tap my brush in that yellow. I'm going to get it good and soaked up on there. I'm going to paint some yellow here in the middle. Just kind of dab it on there. I'm not really trying to scrub it or anything. I'm going to wash out my brush, wipe it on the can a little bit, and I'm going to get one dip of yellow. Remember, one dip of the darker color, because you can always come back and make it darker. But I don't think I'm going to need to on this one. I think it's just right. Because when I mix it, it doesn't look like the orange one, and it definitely does not look like the yellow one. So I'm going to paint that right out to the edges, because it's correct. Spread that out a little bit more evenly there. There we go. So that one's a little easier to tell. All right. I don't want to do this one because that one's still wet, so I'm probably going to skip down and do this one next. Give those other two a few more minutes to dry. So when you look at the blue and the green, you've got your primary and your secondary, and you decide which one is lighter. I think the green is a little lighter than the blue. So I had just washed my brush out, so I'm just going to tap into the green, soak up some of that paint that's there. I'm going to paint it over my words. I'm going to rinse out my brush. And then I'm going to just going to tap one good time in the blue and mix it in, see what happens. Blue's kind of one of those stronger colors because it's a little darker, so it's going to take over your color more quickly than like an orange would or a red would, so you don't want to add too much of the darker ones at a time. This is a really pretty color. I'm happy with this. When you're mixing your colors, your goal is not to make yours look like mine. Your goal is to make your intermediate color not look like your secondary or your primary, okay? Because everybody will mix colors a little differently than everybody else. Like yours might be blue-green, but it might be a little more bluer than it is green, or it might be a little more greener, if that's a word, than it is blue. So, if yours doesn't match mine exactly, don't stress about it. As long as it doesn't match these, you're safe, okay? As long as it's different from those two, then you're good to go. All right. How are we doing? Okay. I am going to move back up to the top now because this one's had the longest amount of time to dry. So I'm going to work on my red violet next. Now, if you look at your primary color red, your secondary color purple or violet, you can tell that red is definitely going to be the lighter color there. So I'm just going to tap into my paint a little, and I'm going to cover my word with it, and then rinse rinse out my brush. Now, purple is the darkest of them all, so I don't know. I mean, I would do like half a tap. Okay, I definitely would not do a full tap because it's the darkest. And I'm just going to stir that into my red. And it's probably going to instantly change for you. So I can tell that definitely doesn't look like my red, so I can paint that right up next to it. But it's looking a little more purple than I want. So I'm going to rinse out my brush. I'm going to drop some fresh water in there because I need it a little more. And I'm just going to tap my brush. And I'm going to put some more red in that because it needs to lighten up just a little bit. So like I said earlier, you know, you can lighten it a little, but don't expect it to turn like light as yellow when you're adding light to a dark, because that's just not going to happen. It'll change a little bit, but it's not going to change a whole lot. There we go. I'm happy with that. Much better. It doesn't look like red, and it doesn't look like violet. So it's a good red-violet. It's a good mix of the two. There you go. So I'm going to finish these last two, and then I will come back and we'll just kind of recap what we've done, and I will close this video for the day. So I'll be right back. I decided I was going to do this blue violet with you guys because we're talking about the two colors that are the darkest on the color wheel of all of the primary or the secondary colors. So, you know, blue's pretty dark. Violet is pretty dark. Violet is the darkest between the two. So I thought I would do this one with you also, and then we can finish up. So I'm just going to tap into my blue because it's a little lighter than the violet is. And I'm just going to paint some of that on there. Kind of spread that a bit more so you can see. Wash my brush out. And I'm barely tapping in that purple, that violet color, because we know that's going to change it pretty quick because it's the darkest one. Okay. So bring that over there. So if I paint some of this next to my blue, you know, it doesn't really look like blue, but it does a little to me. So I'm going to wash my brush out and I'm going to put the tiniest bit more purple or violet into that, because it's just not quite purpley enough, okay, or violet enough. So I'm going to mix those two. That's better. That looks better, because if I come over here, look at that. It doesn't necessarily, it's kind of a blue violet, which is the goal. We want it to not look like blue. We want it to not look like, we don't want it to match the violet. We want it to be blue violet. So that is my blue violet. And on camera, it looks pretty blue. So just for the sake of the camera, I think I'm just going to put a little more purple in there and stir that up. Because it shouldn't look like either one. And that's easy to do while the paint is still wet. Now, I'm not scrubbing my paper. I'm just wiping across it to mix these in. Because if you try to scrub the two colors together, you're going to get a hole in your paper. That still looks like blue on camera, but I promise you in person here, it's looking pretty accurate. And I've got one that I did earlier that I can show you. Hopefully it looks a little, nope, that looks blue too. Well, I promise one of these looks like a blue violet in real life. So that is the hardest one to make, so don't beat yourself up too much about it if yours, looks a little more purple or a little more blue. But in front of me here, it's looking pretty decent, so it doesn't look like either one. It looks a little blue, or if you look at it on this side, it looks more violet if you look at it on this side. So that's my goal. So just remember to make intermediate colors. If you let a primary mix with the color that is next to it on the color wheel, the secondary color, if you let this primary mix with this one, this secondary, you're going to get this. If you let this primary mix with this secondary, you're going to get that. So as long as the colors that are touching when you paint, if they're neighbors on the color wheel, like these two are, the red and the orange are neighbors, and they have the red orange in the middle, okay? The orange and the yellow, they're neighbors. If we let those two mix together, it's safe because they've got this color in the middle, this intermediate. So when I see you next, we will talk about how to paint your action lines and how to make colors that are pure, more pure and not really muddy and mixed with a lot of other things. So just mixing the primary and the secondaries on your action lines to create those intermediate colors. So I will see you guys next time. I know this one was a little longer, but it takes a little longer when you're painting. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for coming. Bye.